Okay, so let's begin. And so I want to thank everybody for your time to come into this particular talk discussion. It's a very big subject and it's a very big topic, and we can only scratch the surface for now. And as a background information for our future discussion, in fact, um, I have to go through so much readings and so much of all the informations that I previously have, and organize them and choose carefully what I'm going to focus on this time, because it's such a profound and wide topic. So let's use this as first discussion for our future courses, that maybe I can zoom into one of these key highlights today, and that all this can become the foundation for our future discussion. So again, I don't feel that my role here is to provide all the answers. My role here is really to intrigue your interest and to provoke questions, and to allow individual to really know the gaps or where you are in your yoga practice and how much you think you know, and understand that gap and to fill in those gaps. So I think it's so important that yoga practitioners today think that they know and they are so ready to go out there to teach, that they fall side of all the different yogic theories, and especially on the Chinese idea on yoga, and which is have very many people have so little knowledge and understanding on this aspect. So I'm here to, as I said, introduce an idea, provoke some thinking, and to allow you to understand the gaps, or what is it that you need to fill in into the future. So I have these two pictures here. Yeah, at the top is the eight. They are very famous in the Chinese culture. And then below is known as the Western Paradise Mother Goddess, okay, where she is a very beautiful maiden with her peach, yeah, of immortality. So we'll go into this a little bit more. Now, in the narratives of the Taoist idea, there are two major paradises that was formed, okay? And one is known as the Kunlun Mountain, yeah, another one is known as the Penglai. So the Kunlun Mountain, in fact, is within the scope of this Tibetan range of mountain that would also stretch towards Afghanistan and Pakistan. And it's in the Chinese culture, it is documented within this treaty, you can say, of this geographical, that documents all the geographical location of the world. We call this the Mountain and the Sea Treaties, yeah, Shanghai Jing. And it talks about this Kunlun Mountain as one of the Taoist paradise where supernatural human beings lives there. And we have, in Chinese history, we have a series of mystical medieval emperors, yeah, that was documented. We don't really have a lot of information on them, but they were sort of mandated by the heaven to China, and at the same time they rule with this idea of utmost righteousness in accordance to Tao. Okay, so which means that they have very high level of morality as their main practice. And because of the morality practice, they are able to rule the country. And not only are they able to rule the country, eventually they became immortals. Yeah. So we have quite a lot of emperors. Yeah. Well, and for example, we have Yao, we have Sun, and we have Yan. These are the three emperors known as the tribal emperor, of the ancient past. And then we also have the yellow emperor that was believed to be the descendant of this tribal emperor originally. Yeah, and all these emperors, yeah, eventually became immortal, and they are residing in mountain Kunlun. Okay, and also in this Kunlun paradise, there is a maiden goddesses, yeah, a female known as the Western Mother or the Western Goddess Mother, and she also had this forest of peach trees, and every 500 to 600 years, the tree will actually ripen all the peaches, and one peach that you take from the tree, you gain immortality. So these are the narratives that we have. And then in Chinese, we also have something similar to Adam and Eve. So we call these two brother and sister, Fu Xi and Nüwa. And they are brother and sister, which is the origin of man. Okay, so you don't only get this Christianity version of Adam and Eve. This existed in China as well, and they talk about the same thing. So the original of men and women, and eventually the mandate of the heaven is that they get married and they produce all the men, all humans, yeah, that is coming from them. And they also have their marriage in the Kunlun Mountain. So the Kunlun Mountain is one very big piece of narratives about this supernatural human beings with supernatural powers, or you can say the immortals, the lands of the immortals. And then another narratives is in the Penglai. Penglai is also another paradise, and they became famous because of the 8 immortals. Yeah. So in this documentation or narratives of how 8 individuals cultivate the Tao and eventually achieve the highest state of Tao of the immortals. And these 8 immortals, they all live in the Penglai paradise. So, and also in the Yellow Emperor Inner Classics, yeah. So this is Huangdi Neijing, which is a very important medical text, you can say. But in fact, from the Taoist perspective, we never look at Huangdi Neijing as a medical text. We always look at Huangdi Neijing as a alchemic text, yeah, that provides the direction of internal cultivation. And in this text, yeah, especially in chapter 1, it talks about the classification of human, yeah, of man. And it says that, in the ancient past, there are real men, there are sapient men, there are sages, and there are virtuous men. And these are in terms of orders of ranking. Yeah. So 真人, the real or authentic, yeah, the authentic man is the one that has achieved the highest of the immortal state. And the sapient is the one that is aspiring to become that, to achieve that kind of authenticity. And sages are people, again, have not reached that highest level of aspiration, but in the path. And then there is the lowest form of cultivation of man, which is to do a lot of virtuous deeds, yeah, to do merits. And also, there is a narrative about the Yellow Emperor in seeking, yeah, his own immortality. Yeah. So bearing in mind that the Yellow Emperor actually is one of the key emperor, yeah, in the ancient time that sort of brought together all the different tribes in China, and in the mountain of Taishan, he declared himself the ruler of the world. Yeah. So Sima Qian is one of the historian, one of the very important historian dynasty, and he, in his documentation of the history of China, he puts Yellow Emperor as one of Chinese common ancestor. Okay, but again, bearing in mind that even before Yellow Emperor, there is at least, yeah, three other emperors that we already know before him, yeah, which we already talked about, the Yao, the Sun, and the Yan, and they sort of precedes the time of the Yellow Emperor. Yeah, but Sima Qian, in his documentation of history in the Han Dynasty, put Yellow Emperor as the first emperor. Okay, and he unifies the different tribes in China and begin to learn the art of sustaining life and prevention of diseases, which then comes about the documentation of Huangdi Neijing, or the Yellow Emperor Inner Classics. Yeah, this so-called the medical text. Now, in the literature and the documentation of Zhuangzi, yeah, Zhuangzi is actually one of philosophers and thinker in contemporary with Lao Tzu and Confucius, and in this documentation of Zhuangzi, there is a chapter that talks about the Yellow Emperor goes to this mountain Kongdong, Kongdong mountain, and seek the master, yeah, and to request for the highest knowledge of Tao, yeah, and the Tao should enable him to become a better emperor, to rule everything under him, yeah, and it was said that when he met Guang Chengzi, yeah, Guang Chengzi, the master Guang Chengzi is already 1,200 years old, yeah, and he turned the Yellow Emperor away because he was thinking that the Yellow Emperor has too much pride and he doesn't want to reveal the Tao, and the Yellow Emperor sort of stay nearby, yeah, and in a hut for 3 months to prepare himself, and then after that, Guang Zhenzi show him and give instruction to him about the Tao. So this also is quite a famous narrative about seeking immortality, beginning with the ancient emperors of China. So what is Taoism? Actually, there are so many ways to cut this, but in fact, this is the way I would like to look at it. So I'm introducing this view to you. So there is that part that is talking about self-cultivation to become immortalities. Yeah. So these cultivators, we call them the xiu xian means the cultivation of or the art of cultivation for immortality. Yeah. So in the language of Chinese, we also call this part of knowledge Huang Lao Zhi Su. Huang Lao Zhi Su, which literally it means the yellow and old methods, yeah, for attainment of immortalities. And then there is that philosophical views, which is very similar to the idea of darshanas or darshanas, either equivalent to in yoga or Indian philosophy in general, you can say. They are philosophical views, and there are many, but some of these you might already know, the documentation of Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, and then the teachings of Confucius, and the teachings of Zhuangzi, and the Book of Change, which is about I Ching. So these are some of the philosophical views of yin yang about the cultivation of human, of man, what he needs to do, yeah, in order to attain the highest reality, yeah. And then there is that ritual aspect that is forming the religious practices, and they are actually the origin of all these practices is coming from another school known as the heavenly masters, yeah, the Tian Shi, yeah. And Zhang Daoning is one of the key masters, yeah, of the Han dynasty. I would say maybe around the late Han dynasty, and he stayed in this Taoist mountain known as Qingchen San in today's Sichuan. So he is said to have a vision of Lao Tzu that gives him all the instruction of the Tao, and he miraculously is able to channel all that knowledge and came up with his own school known as the School of Tianshi, or the Heavenly Master School. Yeah. And then we also have the neo Taoism teaching, that this is as a result of sort of like because of the popularity of Buddhism in the 7th century. And then these teachings, together with Confucius teaching and Taoist teaching, are all mixed into one. Okay, so various developments, you can say, yeah, and schools of Taoism. So 3 stages of Taoist cultivation: 1, healing; yeah, 2, longevity; and 3, immortality. And these are in tandem or in stages. Okay, so the healing aspect is about revitalization of internal mechanism. Yeah, so of course it includes your organs, yeah, and all that. But we will later on look at the 3 treasures, and we are looking at revitalizing the Jing, the Qi, and the Shen within the body itself. Okay, so healing is a natural mechanism of the body, and that's how the body can sustain itself. So the first part of the practice is always about revitalizing, and we have to understand why it needs to be revitalized. Yeah, so I'll show you later the reason behind revitalization. So when you are able to revitalize, the next stage is to go into a higher practice known as longevity, and longevity has to do with rejuvenation. Yeah, rejuvenation. To that is in having this revitalization as the foundation, you go into a higher state of practice and you come into rejuvenation. And then the last stage is immortality, which is to reset everything. Yeah, that means you start all over again. Yeah, you start afresh, you start anew. Yeah, you have a new life, and actually, yeah. So your old life dies, and you became, everything became new one more time. So it's a reset of your life. Yeah, and so we first have to look at the 3 treasures, and the Taoists believe that the human life had 3 treasures, and known as the Jing, the Qi, and the Shen. And the important thing we have to really understand here is the prenatal Jing, prenatal Qi, and the prenatal Shen. How is this going to be different from the postnatal Jing, Qi, and Shen? Okay, so to help us to really understand this, I'm picking up one of the very important Taoist master from the Longmen school, yeah, in the Ming Dynasty around the 14th century, known as Liu Yiming. Yeah? And he gave us an explanation how to understand the original Jing, the original Qi, and the original Shen. Yeah? So he said that these 3 comes from a time before the father and the mother co-join. When they co-join, before the father's essence is given, and the mother's blood envelopes it. Yeah, so the key word here is before. Yeah, before. So before this, their feelings are united and their intentions are in agreement. So which suggests to us that there is something that involves the mind, the emotion, as well as the spirit. Yeah. So after the essence has been given forth by the father and the blood receive it, they merge and envelope this particle of truth. So at that moment, when the sperm and the egg meets, yeah, you can say, yeah, that integration or that being, yeah, is known as the particle of truth. Yeah, this truth suggesting a sense of origin. Yeah, that means that it is the primordial. Yeah, it is the primordial at that moment. Yeah, it is the primordial which transform itself and takes form. Okay, so it is this kind of energy that is able to, because of the true principle, because of the true essence that has been enabled, you can say, yeah, enabled, then that by itself, yeah, doesn't need guiding from anything from outside or from inside. That by itself is able to transform itself and takes a particular form. Okay, so this prenatal Jing, Qi, and Shen is what, in the first part, yeah, if you read this carefully, is what that is guiding the transformation and the shape or the form of life. Okay, so the Jing, Qi, and Shen has three names, but in fact they are one. One refers to the innocate origin, yeah, which is just innocate origin is just suggesting that something that is uh, um, just before maturity, yeah, just before its time, yeah, that is the one, yeah, that is the one that is pulling the tree together. Yeah, we might say that in this body of the innocate origin, which is unmixed throughout, its pure unity becomes the Jing. What flows throughout its vein becomes the Qi, and what moves through its numerous emptiness becomes the Shen or spirit. Yeah. So the original Jing, the original Qi, and original Shen is now formed into this body. Yeah, is now formed into this human being, and it is part of this body or is part of this life. But how do we understand that? It says that that which is unmixed throughout is pure unity becomes the Jing. Yeah, and there is so much in this sentence that you have to sort of contemplate. Yeah, it is that part of life that is unmixed throughout is pure unity that becomes the Jing. Yeah, what flows through the veins becomes the Qi, and what moves in its numerous emptiness, yeah, which also suggests all the space, yeah, all the space that is found within this life, yeah, become the Shen or the spirit. Original Jing is like a pearl or a dewdrop, yeah, it is pure, flawless, and unmixed, and nurtures and moisten the 100 bones. Yeah, so it is this kind of purity that nurtures this life form. Okay, the original Qi is the mist. It runs throughout the 100 vessels. Yeah. Original Shen is utterly numerous and utterly sacred. It rules over the 10,000 pursuits. Yeah. So these pursuits also include, you can say, the mundane pursuits or the desires of the heart, and also extraordinary pursuits of ultimate enlightenment. By knowing, yeah, by knowing them, you can increase the number of your years and live a long life without aging. Yeah. So the whole idea of cultivation, yeah, or you can say the whole premise and rationale behind Chinese yoga, yeah, is to know the original Jing, the original Qi, and the original Shen, and know how to come back to this part of life, yeah, so that you can revitalize everything and ultimately you reset everything. So what's the problem with the postnatal qi? Yeah. So in the documentation of Huangdi Jing, the Yellow Emperor Classics, yeah, is it, for example, yeah, this I'm only taking out from the women because we don't have time, yeah, to talk about the men. So it says that a woman's kidney energy become prosperous at the age of 7, yeah. Now this part, so from the day the female baby is born until the age of 7, this is known as the prenatal stage. Yeah. So throughout this time, because of the prosperity of the kidney's energy, yeah. So what happened is that the baby doesn't need to eat anything solid and it can grow very, very fast. Yeah, because of this prenatal qi, yeah, that is still residing, and she has the ability to still utilize the prenatal qi, yeah, within the early stage of her life. And then there is a second 7, yeah, her menstruation appear as the sea of yin channel flows, and the chong, the sea of blood channel, became prosperous at the age of 14. So now she has more power, yeah, but then she actually moves into the postnatal stage. So once you cross 8 years old all the way to about 14 years old, you're going into the postnatal. Yeah. So just bear in mind that women's lifespan changes every 7 years. Yeah. So this is according to the calculation of Bangtine Jing's understanding of a female's body, and every 8 years for the man's body. Yeah. So the next 7, her kidney qi reaches a balanced state and her teeth and are completely developed at the age of 21. So this shows that she is still very, very strong, and she begins to come into an age of maturity, yeah, in her bones. Yeah, so this stage talk about the teeth. The teeth has to do with her bones. Then the next one, her vital energy and blood are sustainable, her 4 limbs are strong, and the body is at optimum condition at the age of 28. So a human body actually takes a long time to come into this stage of maturity. So for example, in the women's body, a fully matured body of the bone and the flesh come at the age of 28. Yeah. So that's why human has a long lifespan, because it takes so many years for the body to become mature. Yeah. So the bones are actually coming into the stage of maturity before the muscles, the veins, the ligaments and the tendons come into maturity, yeah, which is at the age of 28. Then her peak condition declines gradually. So after, yeah, you already peak, then you start to come down. The yang ming channel is depleted, the face within, and her hair begins to fall at the age of 35. Then the next stage, her 3 yang channels, the Tai Yang, the Yang Ming, and Shao Yang, begins to decline. Her face complexion wanes and her hair turns white at the age of 42. Then the Ren and the Chong channel, or the Ren and the Chong meridians, which we also have discussed in the past, are both declining. Her menstruation ends, her physique turns old and feeble, and she can no longer conceive at the age of 49. So you can see, if we just go with the flow of the postnatal qi cycle, then eventually, yeah, the qi comes down and the body goes through aging and eventually die, which is why the Taoist practices is trying to stop this from happening. Yeah, so it is really about understanding the condition of the postnatal and trying to return and go back to the prenatal condition. Yeah, so the success of the practice is when one is able to stop the consequences of the postnatal Jing, Qi, and Shen, and redevelop this Jing, Qi, and Shen to go back to its original form in the prenatal state. Yeah, so this is the premise of Taoist cultivation. So many things you need to do. So as I said, there are 3 stages. So the first stages is healing, and it is known as the nourishment of life. Yeah, so it's very famous. Is in Chinese we call Yang Shen. And then in Yangshan, so many things, and we really have no time to really go into one by one. And I'll just sort of list them here just to give you an idea on the scope of study. The first thing in the doctrine of Wangdi Jing, yeah, the Yellow Emperor, is to understand the causes of disease, yeah, and then to understand the causes of longevity, and then the cultivation of the mind and the emotions, and then understanding the seasons and the climatic changes that affects this body. Then you also have to understand the diet, how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, yeah, how much to eat, all that. And then that also includes eventually understanding on what we call super medicinal plant, okay, which is part of Taoist alchemy. And then you also have to understand the work stress and exhaustion that is being put into the body. And in the past, in the ancient time, there are a lot of physical work. So there is a lot of cautions and advice against excessive physical exhaustion. And then this part is very interesting. It's known as the affairs of the bedroom. Yeah, so this has to do with sexual practices, or sometimes it's known as sexual hygiene. So how many times to have sex, when to have sex, a particular day where you can have sex, and in what situation you cannot have sex, and so how to have sex to conceive a boy, how to have sex to conceive a girl, is a very, very extensive discussion. And also I particularly look at sexual practices for healing, yeah, which is a more tantric idea that talks about how you can actually use sex as a form of healing instead of sex for pleasure. Yeah, so again, this is very, very big ticket item. And then the last part is discussing about understanding special care, yeah, during a special period of a woman's life, for example, pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding. What is it that you should do? So I'm just giving you this idea that under Yang Shen, under this topic known as nourishment of life, is a very, very big subject. And we have a particular figure, Chinese physicians, that are particularly discussing about this topic. Yeah, that this list that I'm going through. And then just to help you to understand a little bit more, like for example, in the chapter 1 of Bounding Aging, it talks about the causes of disease. Yeah, it says, on the other hand, people today are different, yeah, because they intoxicate themselves exorbitantly, replace a normal life with a life of abuse, having sexual intercourse while intoxicated, intoxicated, exhaust their pure energy through gratification of their desires, waste their true energy through carelessness, and prolong consumption, yeah, overeating, yeah, fail to retain the energy in abundance and to guard their spirit, yeah, constantly, rush to gratification uh, of their hearts, to the contrary of true happiness in life, uh, live their daily lives in an irregular pattern. It is for these reasons that they can only have half of their lifespan. Okay, so again, there are many things to unpack here. Yeah, but this gives a summary of the idea. Uh, the premise of Huangdi Jing is to really understand about why people uh, caught diseases, yeah, get themselves into illnesses, get themselves into disease, and why is it that they could not live through a full span of their life? Yeah, so this is the premise of the discussion. And then Huang Jing also specifically talk about the mind as a spirit, yeah, as a spirit, and how you should guard the spirit, yeah. So it says that ancient people who knows the Tao lives in accordance pattern of yin and yang, which is a pattern of heaven and earth, remain in harmony with numerical symbols, which are the great principles of human life. Yeah, eaten. Wait, let me see. Eaten and drink in. Sorry, it should be eat and drink in moderation. Live their lives, live their daily lives in a regular pattern with neither excess nor abuse. For this reason, their spirits and body have remained in perfect harmony with each other, and consequently, they could live out their natural lifespan. So here, uh, in Huang Jing, it talks about human lifespan at the years of 100. Yeah, if you look at the study of the Book of Change, we talk about 60 years as one cycle, and human have two cycle of the 60 years, which means that in fact there is a potential of living up to 120 years. Okay. Then the third the next level of cultivation is longevity. So here, this picture, yeah, I show you this, yeah. It talks about three aspects that you need to have in life, yeah. The Fu, the Lu, and the Shou. And the Shou is this old man, yeah, with a long beard, yeah, not having a lot of hair. So you need to have um, uh, this long life as one of your key success. Okay, so this is what the Chinese believe. And so longevity has always been seen as one of the key success or key achievement in life. Yeah. When one knows how to revitalize the body to maintain long-term good health, they can proceed to increase their primordial qi to the level at the beginning of birth. Yeah, so longevity practices is all about revitalizing, yeah, the mechanism of the body such that you can increase the original qi or the primordial qi to the level at the beginning of birth. So there are external practices and internal practices. So in the Taoist practice, they have prayers, medicinal herbs. Daoyin is actually traditional Chinese exercises. Yeah. So Dao means uh, directive or giving direction. Yin literally means action of pulling a bow and an arrow. And here it suggests some kind of a physical movement. Okay, so it's directing the physical movement, yeah, but in fact, the direction here is about the qi. Okay, so it's directing the qi by using physical movement. So this is the premise for you can say traditional Chinese exercises called Daoyin and sexual practices. Yeah, which again in my last discussion in Hatha Yoga, this is a very key thing, which is why they are in common. Yeah, Hatha Yoga documents about sexual practices, and Taoist is also having a huge discussion on sexual practices or different ways of increasing this essence, yeah, to achieve longevity through sexual practices. And you also have breathing and internal alchemy. So the next one is achieving immortality as the highest stage of the cultivation. So it brings the cultivation to the highest level where one can become an immortal and live freely among the supernatural beings at Kunlun or Penglai. So this is the ideal, yeah, or the narratives of the Taoists, that they are able to do the highest form of cultivation to achieve this state of immortality. And here, through the internal alchemy, yeah, so in stages, yeah, so there is this idea of you must transform and refine the original Jing, the original Qi, and the original Shen. Okay, so the first stage is known as cultivate Jing to generate the Qi. The second stage, cultivate Qi to generate the Shen, and the third stage, revert the Shen to enter the great void or emptiness. Okay. So I give you some idea about the development of Taoist alchemy. So it goes back to the Yellow Emperor, yeah, and then in the Zhou dynasty, which is about 500 BCE, we have the Zhou dynasty that develops the Book of Change, the I Ching, and then later on, you have all these philosophers that came, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, yeah, all this, and Confucius, yeah, they all came to form the Taoist foundational darshanas or philosophical views, yeah. And then in the Han Dynasty, yeah, we have this great development of trying to bring about the Book of Change, the idea of yin yang and Confucius, yeah, together, and they were promoted. Yeah, they were promoted. At the same time, Taoist alchemy is also highly being practiced during the Han Dynasty. Then Zhang Daoling at the end of the Han Dynasty, so he developed his own school known as the, you can say, Celestial Master School or the Heaven Master School, that brings about a lot of mantras, yeah, mantra practices and talisman, yeah, special kind of talisman to be made, and also different kinds of alchemic external, especially external alchemic practices, yeah, to develop a special pill that is pure yang in its energy, so that when you ingest that, yeah, you become an immortal. Then we have, again, during the Han Dynasty, another great book known as the Chan Tong Qi by Wei Bo Yang. Yeah, so he makes the idea of I Ching as well as the internal alchemic practices to in a way give his alchemic view a philosophical foundation, yeah, based on I Ching. And then we have Ge Hong, that also is in the Han Dynasty, that documents all the ancient saints of the past, and he's trying to refute the Confucius practices at that time to say that the Confucius that pursues highest morality is different from the immortals. And then Zhong Li Quan is also very important for, especially in the Tang Dynasty, alchemic practices, which is an internal alchemic practices. And one of his main disciple is Lü Dongbin. Yeah, so I would say in the Han Dynasty, yeah, so in the first and the second century, yeah, the external alchemy is highly practiced, yeah, which is the practice of making a pill, yeah, using mercury and sulfur and all that kind of weird material, yeah, to collate and to make into a pure yang energy pill to ingest. But later on in the Tang Dynasty, especially at the end of the Tang Dynasty, Lü Dongbin came and he provided another view of internal alchemy, which is to look at the three treasures as inherently already in the body. Yeah, and therefore there is no need for any kind of external cauldron, yeah, that needs to be set up. And the Taoist alchemy, a way to liberate from the mortals to achieve immortal, to achieve from mortal to become immortal. Yeah, this is done by means of using medicine and internal visualization. Yeah, so at the end of the Tang Dynasty, yeah, so all the alchemic practices is internalized, yeah, through visualization. Yeah, physical practices includes qigong, breathing, and qi directing movement. So qi breathing will include things like reverse breathing, holding, and the use of sound. So again, it sounds very familiar because these are also techniques that are used in Hatha Yoga. And then also micro and macro orbit visualization. Yeah. So as I said, this is a very big ticket item to discuss, and I'm trying to sort of just give you an introductory idea of the history, the historical background, as well as how the Chinese or the ancient Taoists view yoga and their aspiration. Yeah, why is it that they want to do this kind of practices? I think one of the difference between the last lecture and this one is that you see that in the Indian tradition, there is always that premise that says that, okay, yogic practices is to relieve some form of pain and suffering. So this has come up very, very clearly in our last discussion from the Indian tradition. Life is somewhat a series of confrontation or dissatisfaction, and therefore you have to look for ways to overcome it. So in the Purusharthas, yeah, in the last one that we discussed, so the last stage of life is to look for solution. And what is the solution? Moksha. Yeah, is to go into a stage of spiritual cultivation to look for how you can achieve eternal happiness without suffering. So this form a very premise and foundation of why you should be looking at yogic practices. Now, in the Chinese tradition is always same thing. Yeah, they also believe that there are various kind of dissatisfaction in life. But if you look at the beginning of the argument and the discourse in Huangdi Jing, you will already understood that very much it is focusing on suffering from disease, suffering from illnesses, and suffering, and because of all these illnesses, disease that is faced by a normal human being, they could not eventually live to their full lifespan. So they have boiled down the so-called suffering to a more narrow idea of this suffering due to illnesses. Yeah, so the argument is that how can we develop ourselves in such a way that we can actually defy, yeah, all different kinds of illnesses that is going to attack the body, yeah, and come into this indestructible state, and therefore achieve longevity and eventually achieve immortality. So this is sort of the argument of the Taoist way of practicing the yoga, so to speak. Okay, so I've spoken a lot. I leave a few minutes for your question if there is any. A lot to digest, no? So again, as I said, I invite you to open up your camera so that we can have a face-to-face discussion. Any particular thoughts? Ting Lan, can you help? Diana is trying to talk.
Okay. I yes. Okay, can. Yeah. Thank you. Diana, try again.
Cannot. She say cannot.
Try. Sorry. Try again.
Okay, okay. So that is to say, when the lifespan after 120, they manage to achieve immortality, they become like celestial being.
So the way before you're 120, no?
You're no ageless.
So the argument of Taoists why you need to achieve longevity, why you need to have a long life is because you need a lot of time to refine, to go back to the original Jing, original Qi, yeah, and the original Shen, yeah. So it takes a long time to cultivate, to go back to the original state, and therefore you do not want to suffer a short life before this is successful. That's why preservation of life is very key in the idea of Taoist practice. Yeah. So the first thing the master will always tell you to do is to preserve your life. Yeah. So that's the first thing they will teach you. That's why you need yang shen, you need the nourishment of life, that first, and then you do other practices. Also, in order to go back to this original state, if the postnatal is weak, you cannot do it. Okay, so the nourishment of life has to be done first to bring yourself up to a particular threshold. Okay, so that's the reason why. Yeah, so as I said, any one of this point that I pick on, it is a module, it's a course by itself. Yeah, it can be discussed as a course by itself. Yeah, and over time, I do intend to have specific course on some of these points that you can come into, and we can have a deeper discussion. And I think it's a very good time for us to actually do this online, in a sense that we can actually take our time and go through original texts to really understand. Yeah, and we look at the text and we try to understand from this ancient text. Now, all these texts that I refer to you, unless you are really an avid Taoist practitioner, you will not know them and you probably will not look at them. Okay, so like this master Liu Yiming in the 14th century Ming Dynasty, he belongs to the school of Longmen. Yeah, Longmen is part of this the original school of Longmen is known as Quanzhen. Quanzhen. So Quanzhen actually became a very, very big school, yeah, in maybe around the 11th and the 12th century. Yeah, and because there are 7 masters that became enlightened, yeah, in this school, and the way they do it continuously influence until the Taoism today. Yeah, so the later stage of how the Taoist alchemy, when people talk about Taoist alchemy, they actually refers to the Longmen school or the Quanzhen. Okay, and this again is a later development. If we were to compare the alchemy that is discussed by the Yellow Emperor, it is a different alchemy. It is a different alchemy. So we have to look at alchemy that was done, yeah, Han Dynasty and before. And then we have to look at the alchemy that is from Tang Dynasty later, after Tang Dynasty. Yeah. So a few periods that alchemy, known as the later development of alchemy, from the Tang And then you have the I would say maybe the Song dynasty. Yeah, the Song dynasty. There is something in between, but major part of the text, yeah, Tang dynasty, Song dynasty, and the Ming dynasty. These are the three periods where there is huge amount of enlightened masters from the Taoist school and various Taoist school, which are very, very interesting. Yeah, so if you look into them, yeah. So as I said, this is a very big topic of discussion, and it really only if you are so keen that you will probably take your time to look at them. Okay, it's very for very small group of people. Yeah, it's for very small group of people. But I'm glad I'm able to probably provide you some kind of background information, and over time, when we have time, we will look into like nourishment of life. Yeah, and within the nourishment of life, there is so much discussion about food, and then like a lot of discussion about sexual practices. So these are some of the very interesting things that I will highlight, and they will be made into a course in the future. Okay.
Yeah, Victor, we got to end. Yeah.
Okay, so that's all I have for you today. Yeah. Thank you very much. Namaste. Yeah, I see you.